From the moment Jasmine Crockett walked into the chamber, the weight of her story was palpable. She wasn't just a figure behind a podium, she was the embodiment of struggle, resilience, and relentless commitment to justice. Born into a world that tried to define her by limitations, Jasmine's early years were shaped by the invisible chains of systemic obstacles that so often constrict the lives of those who dare to dream beyond society's narrow expectations. Yet, rather than bending under these pressures, she found a quiet, unyielding strength, a determination that would one day echo across the corridors of power. Her family's narrative was one of migration and hope. They carried with them the scars of displacement, the memories of sacrifice, and a steadfast belief in the promise of America. From a young age, Jasmine observed the subtle injustices that others often ignored: neighbors struggling to access healthcare, children navigating schools that failed to see their potential, communities silenced by bureaucracy and prejudice. These early observations were not just lessons in empathy, they were the seeds of a lifelong mission. She learned that true leadership was born not from titles or accolades, but from listening, observing, and acting with unwavering integrity. Education became her sanctuary and her battlefield. Each textbook, each lecture, each debate sharpened her mind and fortified her resolve. But it wasn't enough to simply succeed academically. Jasmine understood that knowledge without action was empty. She volunteered in clinics, tutored students in underserved neighborhoods, and championed local initiatives that sought to dismantle barriers for the marginalized. Every encounter with injustice deepened her conviction. She would not only participate in the world around her, she would challenge it, reshape it, and demand that it reflect the values of fairness and equity she held sacred. The legal arena became her proving ground. As a young attorney, Jasmine navigated complex cases where the stakes were more than just money, they were lives, dignity, and rights at risk. Her courtroom victories were never just personal triumphs, they were victories for communities whose voices had been muted for too long. Opposing counsel often underestimated her, viewing her presence as another obstacle rather than a formidable force. But Jasmine wielded every precedent, every nuance of law, and every shred of moral clarity to dismantle arguments built on privilege and complacency. Her reputation grew, not for theatrics, but for an unshakable commitment to truth and justice. It was this foundation that propelled her into the political arena. Jasmine understood that policy could shape lives in ways individual victories could not. She entered public service not for ambition or recognition, but out of necessity, a recognition that those who experience injustice firsthand must be at the table where decisions are made. Her campaigns were rooted in community engagement, listening tours, and policy proposals that addressed real-world problems: affordable healthcare, equitable education, housing justice, and immigrant rights. Supporters were drawn not only to her intellect but to her authenticity. She was a reflection of their struggles and their hopes, a living testament that leadership could come from empathy as much as experience. The crucible of politics, however, tested her in ways no courtroom ever could. In an arena dominated by ego, entrenched power, and the relentless scrutiny of media and opponents, Jasmine's composure and moral clarity became her shield. She faced criticism aimed at undermining her identity, rhetoric designed to provoke, and obstacles constructed by those threatened by her ascendancy. Yet, each challenge reinforced her understanding that true leadership required patience, courage, and strategic grace. She learned to read the room, anticipate maneuvers, and respond with precision, ensuring that every action advanced her mission while staying true to her principles. Jasmine's personal story, her identity, heritage, and the barriers she overcame, became inseparable from her political persona. She embraced the fullness of her background, the immigrant narratives in her family, the cultural richness of her community, and the lived experience of navigating systemic inequities. This was not mere symbolism, it was power. By authentically representing who she was, Jasmine inspired others to recognize their own worth, their own potential, and the importance of taking a stand in a society that often marginalizes voices like theirs. Every speech, every interview, every public appearance was an opportunity to validate the identities of countless Americans who saw themselves reflected in her resilience. Her rise was not meteoric by accident. It was the result of tireless work, calculated risks, and a network of mentors, allies, and community members who recognized the depth of her vision. They saw in Jasmine someone who could bridge divides, articulate progressive ideals in compelling, actionable ways, and confront entrenched power with clarity and poise. but they also knew that the true measure of her strength would reveal itself not in calm moments of victory but in high-stakes confrontations where character is tested and the world is watching. And that test arrived in the chamber that day, when the air itself seemed to thrum with tension. Kennedy, with all his calculated charm and political weight, underestimated Jasmine. He assumed history, status, and familiarity with the system would intimidate her, or at least make her pliable. What he did not realize was that Jasmine had been forged precisely for moments like this. She had navigated invisible barriers, broken ceilings built by skepticism and prejudice, and transformed every setback into preparation for confrontation. Her identity, her struggles, and her victories converged at this singular instant, equipping her to respond not with haste or fury, but with unshakable, strategic precision. As she rose to address the chamber, there was a subtle shift in energy. Allies straightened in their seats, detractors leaned forward, sensing the impending collision. Jasmine's voice, steady and deliberate, carried both authority and empathy, commanding attention without demanding it. Each word was measured, each pause intentional, creating a rhythm that drew listeners in and framed the narrative on her terms. This was not performance, it was mastery. Every glance, every inflection, every carefully chosen phrase underscored that she was more than prepared to dismantle arrogance with dignity, to confront power with truth, and to validate the struggles of those who had long been overlooked. Her preparation was meticulous. Years of public service had honed her instincts, sharpened her analysis, and refined her delivery. She anticipated every possible angle Kennedy might exploit, every rhetorical trap, every media narrative waiting to pounce. And yet, she did not allow cynicism or fear to dominate her approach. Instead, she transformed preparation into confidence, and confidence into a moral compass that guided her through the confrontation ahead. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett was not simply a representative or an attorney, she was a symbol, a culmination of resilience, intellect, and unwavering principle. By the time Kennedy opened his mouth, the room was already witnessing the subtle but undeniable shift in power. Jasmine's presence, credibility, and history of service radiated with a force that no status or inherited authority could match. Every anecdote from her past, every trial, every campaign victory had led to this instant, a convergence of skill, integrity, and identity that would leave an indelible mark on the chamber, the audience, and history itself. And as she prepared to respond, a sense of inevitability settled in. What Kennedy believed would be a routine display of dominance would instead be remembered as the moment Jasmine Crockett transformed expectation into action, arrogance into humility, and tension into clarity. The weight of that history, the depth of her journey, and the precision of her strategy all converged as she prepared to make her move. Every member of the room, every camera lens, every social media watcher felt the undercurrent of something extraordinary unfolding. This was more than a debate, more than a political maneuver, it was a vindication of years of perseverance, a living demonstration of what it meant to face entrenched power with courage and clarity. And just as the chamber held its collective breath, Jasmine Crockett took her first deliberate step forward, setting the stage for the confrontation that would define the day, the narrative, and the very definition of leadership in moments of trial. The anticipation was electric. Allies and adversaries alike sensed that the coming seconds would mark a turning point, not just in this debate, but in the story of representation, justice, and principled leadership. Jasmine's gaze met Kennedy's, and in that silent exchange, the chamber recognized that this was no ordinary moment. It was the moment where preparation, resilience, and moral authority would collide with entitlement, complacency, and arrogance, and the outcome would leave a mark that could not be ignored. Every observer understood, whether consciously or not, that what was about to unfold would define not only the debate but the enduring narrative of courage against entrenched power.